Hi, and welcome to How Rehabilitation Counselor Manage Different Levels of Parental Acceptance. Here, what we're really focusing on is that transition stage period of time, where folks are transitioning out of school services into adult services and managing all of those changes. And parents are getting hit with a variety of different ideas and concepts and having to come to terms with a lot of different realities. It's a hard time for parents. It's a hard time for counselors. I want to give a little bit of background on what brought me into doing this type of presentation. Back when I was a really early rehab counselor, just starting out first, 6 months of being a counselor, a guy and his family, I will call him Phil, walks in. Phil is almost turning 45. His parents are close approaching 70. This is the first time they've been in Voc rehab. This is really kind of a strange experience for them. They didn't know we existed. Here they are. Phil has a lifetime of not really doing difficult things. When his parents say class, he didn't go. They let him not go. When it was time to, after graduating, instead of working or school or any of those things, he kind of settled into his spot in the basement. As video games became more and more popular, I guess that was where he spent his time. Netflix, video games, all of those things. And typical teen. But now Phil is 45. Now mom and dad are almost 70. They're retired. He's still living in their basement. They don't know what is coming next. They have turned down services from his diagnosis all the way through now, age 45. A lifetime of saying, no, I don't want voc rehab. No, I don't need an IEP. No, all of these different supports they turned down periodically. But then they were really struck with this question. What happens to Phil when we die? And we didn't have any good answers for them. Phil, as I continued on in my career, Phil kept showing up. Not as Phil the client, but as Phil, this archetype. Clients kept turning up in their late 30s, their mid 40s, even sometimes their early 50s. And their parents are just kind of asking, what do we do? What happens when we're not here to take care of him anymore? And that really early experience hit for me the importance of that transition period, helping people really get ready for adulthood in a way that it didn't that somehow they'd missed. They'd not gotten those services. Someone either didn't or couldn't reach them, or they weren't ready to receive it. And that ready to receive it piece is the critical thing. What really hit me hard, in rehab counseling, we learn about disability acceptance. It's this process. It's sometimes created as a stage model. Sometimes it's a psychodynamic thing that people go through, but it's always focused on usually someone who has an acquired disability. They used to walk, now they can't, and they go through this acceptance process of being able to adapt to doing pretty much everything differently. But it really hit me early on that acceptance is a stakeholder issue. It's not just something individuals go through. All of their uh, key people in their lives go through acceptance. Spouses, parents, caregivers, all of these critical parts of someone's life have to go through acceptance in order for everything to come together for that person. And as rehab counselors, we do all kinds of stuff to support and intervene on people's the systems that they operate within. We do psychoeducation, we'll provide training, we meet needs, we do all kinds of things like this. Stakeholder acceptance, parental acceptance, family acceptance. These are all another opportunity that we can intervene on the systems that our clients operate within by providing support. So, before we get started, there's just a couple of terms that I think it would be good to define to just make it clear for our presentation so that we're talking about the same things as we use it. First one, disability acceptance. This is a Rehab 101 term in Foundations of Rehabilitation. This comes up a lot. there's a lot of different nuance to what disability acceptance is and what it means. It presented as a variety of different things, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'm really looking at incorporating a disability into one's identity and lifestyle, being able to accept strengths and weaknesses, abilities and capabilities, limitations and accommodations, and all of those things, all as kind of part of the whole, not denying them, ignoring them, or making them everything all at once. Kind of a how I'm looking at defining this. In disability acceptance literature, it's usually focused on the individual with the disability. But there's also parental acceptance. Parental acceptance, for the purposes of this presentation, is the process that parents go through when someone is born with a disability. Um, they certainly do go through an acceptance process, but it's a little bit different, and all the timing is a little bit different than someone who acquires a disability later on in life, who goes through an immediate change. The person born with a disability maybe goes through acceptance differently at certain milestones and as they interact with peers and the world and things like that. Parents, however, they go through acceptance right there. That change is at the point of diagnosis. They may know before the child is born, they may know somewhere between 2 and 4. There's a lot of points in time where they might find out about their child's disability. And so they're going to go through that acquiring type process themselves as their child is diagnosed. Then they're also going to go through it as their child goes through it. They're going to see it again at certain milestones, major milestones like graduating high school, minor milestones like walking and first day of school, first bringing a friend home to play. Those types of things as well will initiate an acceptance or rejection moment, or acceptance and non-acceptance moment. And issues that come up with not accepting, major, not issues that come up, major things that parents will tend to face major acceptance moments would be at the point of diagnosis, at transition out of high school into adult services, and then again as parents lose their independence. Those become those critical high point moments where acceptance becomes really important for parents. And then CRC Code of Ethics, it defines a client as individual with or individuals affected by a disability. So with the CRC Code of Ethics definition, this can include parents. As rehab counselors, we do seek opportunities to intervene on systems that our clients operate within, which could be family systems, could be employment systems, school systems, or any other type of system. But this is one where we can really have a big impact on a client's life because of the way the better their parents go through an acceptance process, it's likely to positively impact the client's acceptance process as well. And then the other big thing we talk about is transition. And I know that there are some transition counselors watching. There's a lot more nuance to what I'm about to use as a definition, but for the purposes of this presentation, when I think of transition, what I'm really talking about is that change from high school into adult services, where people go from having it all under one roof to community-based services, or they go from entitlement-based programs into eligibility-based programs. Having people advocate for you to having to advocate for yourself. Those types of transitions where people go from minor to adult literally overnight in the eyes of the law have to go through a lot of adjustment and planning and transitionary time. So that's really what I'm thinking when I talk about transition throughout this presentation. That's what I'm referring to. All right, so let's get going. All right, so the CRCC, the Commission on Rehab Counselor Certification Code of Ethics, says that our clients are our primary responsibility, and that makes sense. We're here to serve our client. But it's worth noting, A1A says clients are defined as individuals with or directly affected by a disability who receive services from rehab counselors. So there is an ethical precedence here to work to gear our services towards not only our clients, but to make sure that we're intervening on and intervening with those key stakeholders that provide so many supports that usually we're not able to. So, just kind of a little bit of background in rehab counseling, we really focus a lot on community integration, operating within the CRC code of ethics, and then providing advocacy and environmental interventions. Really helping our clients get employment, puts them into the community, then the community has to adapt, which provides more opportunities for more clients to get involved in services, or not just in services, but in their communities. Vocational rehabilitation, of course, that's the piece where we really hone in on employment. I'm guessing most people watching this are vocational rehab counselors working in a state VR program, or I get not a lot of workers comp here. So a state vocational rehab program and providing services that way, helping people move towards independent living and employment. For years, everything was focused on closures, getting that 90 days of services, close the case, get your 26 and chalk up, one more for your numbers at the end of the year. But the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act provided a lot of new and qualitative measures that put a lot of stress on counselors and their organizations, but also provided a lot of opportunity for us to get creative with how we serve our clients and provide more creative services and more holistic approaches to helping them obtain their goals. So, instead of focusing on how many successfully closed cases there are, it's focused on earnings. Not only are our clients supposed to have jobs, but they should have jobs that pay well and that provide them opportunities to participate in their communities, to get raises, to move up, or to, just go home and engage in the hobbies that they enjoy. We want jobs that promote freedom. The other piece that I really like about the Workforce Opportunity Act, Innovation and Opportunity Act, is that focus on pre-ETS, pre-employment services. 15% of every state budget is supposed to go towards pre-employment services. Now, most of us who have been doing transition services, we've been doing this for years anyway. But it enables us to start working with folks at 14 instead of waiting until they're a junior in high school. And it's mandating states that haven't really been on that transition train to get on. 15% of a budget, it has to get on there. Now, there's some red tape and some stuff that goes with it, but it really gets rehab counselors and opportunities to get in and start working not only with clients, but their families, their support providers, their teachers and job coaches, and really get in and make sure that all stakeholders have a good understanding of disability options, strengths, and future potential to fulfill, which really provides that transition phase. There's a lot of changes our clients go through from high school into adulthood. The Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act provides a lot of services, but they're entitlement services. They're very different from eligibility-based services that they get from vocational rehabilitation. They're very different from the supports that you get under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is enforced through the court system. All of these things require that clients are able to self-advocate, or they have people who can help them through the advocacy phase. And it's not just as seamless, which may not be the right word, but not quite as seamless as when they're operating at K through 12 environment. So, what happens when transition planning doesn't happen? This is what I run into, Phil, over and over and over again. Clients counselors that I've interviewed for putting this research together, they ask questions like, do they accept the label that the schools provided? If someone's in denial about their diagnosis or that label, Then when they go from that school entitlement-based service to the adult eligibility-based service, it slows down their ability to get the services that they need. Another counselor said that they've had clients in their 50s and 60s with elderly family members. Cue Phil. And they've never gone through any of the phases of acceptance. It becomes a dysfunctional mess, and the child doesn't want to change their patterns. The parents may not even be well enough to help participate in providing those services. And then another counselor told this story. They had parents who dropped dead, and the client, the kids were left with no family support. There was no transition plan in place. Everyone had to wing it. And you had someone who had not provided, who had not been taught independent living skills. They didn't have the supports in place. And these types of emergencies, they pop up. And individual client wasn't ready. Fortunately, they did have a rehab counselor, so things did work out, but it was not a smooth, seamless transition that just made a hard time much harder. And so transition is such a critical time, and a lot of research points to parents having to go through a secondary role of acceptance in that time. So on that disability acceptance route, disability acceptance, they started doing research on this concept back in the 50s. It was really focused on people who acquired disabilities and how well they adapted to having a disability. There were stage models where denial and bargaining and fighting back and all of these different things that eventually ends in acceptance. There were social models. You had Beatrice Wright and Dolliver, where they started to really bring in the idea that it's not the individual that is disabled, but it is the environment or society that is disabling. It's not that you can't walk that's the problem. It is that society uses stairs. There's a lot of in helping clients to see that they're not dysfunctional, they're not problematic. It's a huge step forward in having them be able to adapt and change, and do the things that they need to do in order to pursue the goals that they want. Across the board, we've got 70 years of disability acceptance research, and it always results in better outcomes. Clients who have gone through acceptance have more resilience. They're more future focused. They're well-being. They manage their health better. It's easier to pursue goals, follow plans, all of those things. Disability acceptance is a good thing. And then it wasn't until the 90s, 80s, or 90s that we started to explore the reality that parents particularly parents of children with congenital disability, they were born with them. They go through an acceptance process, usually before their child themselves go through that disability, through that acceptance process. Some folks have found that parents go through acceptance at critical milestones in the child's life. So, obviously a diagnosis, that's a critical time when new information is flying at them and they're trying to get it all sorted out. But mental milestones, first day of school, uh, you know, age to drive, graduation, adulthood, marriage, family, those things. Whether the child goes through that, whether the client goes through those experiences themselves, or if they're watching all of their peers do it and they're not, all of these trigger acceptance issues. And transition proved to be one of those critical milestones. If you were to say the big three that parents run into the most, is that diagnosis, it's that transition, and it's again as parents are losing their independence and they're thinking, what happens? What happens to Phil when I'm not here? Those questions really come up and they start to weigh really heavily. That transition period, we're going to hone in more on that. Frustrated, they feel left out. Their adolescent is an adult. Maybe family role or interaction pattern. They're still a child, and coming to grips with this adult world that our client is moving into and transitioning from adolescent to adult. That triggers a whole lot of different things in parents. and it makes that process really difficult. On top of that, they're facing stigma of their peers are are talking about their children graduating, going to college, doing a variety of things that a lot of our clients might not be doing, or they'll be doing it and it looks different. So they feel very stigmatized and isolated from this whole process. When parents go through an acceptance process, we know that they have lower levels of burnout. As a whole, tends to be more satisfied with their quality of life and things that are going on. The parents that are accepted, they also tend to be more attuned to their child. They know what their child is going through, and they're better able to provide that support in a way that their child's able to receive it. Less overprotective. That critical ability to try new things and not fear failure reduces substantially. They're able to be future focused and follow plans and adapt and not think as rigidly about it has to go in these orders and it has to follow certain sequences. Just generally have better responses to behavior. They're better able to provide that support that our clients need, and they're able to respond better to the supports that we provide. Here's an example from some of my research about how disability acceptance can go two different ways, just based on, within the same family. You've got one family, one child accepts the disability better than the other. We'll say dad starts researching what does this mean? What starts looking into the future? What does life look like? He gets involved. He reaches out. He makes sure that they're connecting with services. He develops good relationships with service providers. He understands wait lists. He looks at eligibility criteria. He really starts to understand the world that they'll be stepping into. Flip side, mom gets depressed. She struggles to bond with the child. As the child grows, managing the behaviors gets more and more difficult and frustrating. She has a hard time getting these working relationships. She's looking for relief, and service providers are looking to operate within state regulations and requirements and things like that. And these relationships deteriorate because both are looking for different things as they interact. She withdraws from all of her community supports. As things go, you can see how these two parents, they operate very differently. And if you have both parents leaning one way or the other, it can have a tremendous impact on how that disability acceptance process works. All right. So all of this information on disability acceptance begs one question. How do we help people move to greater levels of acceptance? In the literature so far, there's three major themes: social support, stress management, and reducing uncertainty. That is both for individuals trying to increase acceptance, or specifically my topic is working with the parents. Um, so with social support, connecting parents to other parents proves to be a really helpful aspect for improved acceptance. Parents report being isolated, they report being stigmatized. They give lots of information about just all of the major life transitions look different from them than they do for a lot of their peers and their friends. That's very difficult and it's very isolating for them. So connecting them to other parents is really helpful to moving them to acceptance. So much so that it's in most studies, it is either the most significant factor or the only statistically significant factor when they look at a variety of factors that impact acceptance levels. Stress management also has a lot of promise, just helping parents learn to adapt and become more resilient, have larger or more focused locus of control, teaching them different ways to make plans, change plans, roll with change as they come. Just kind of taking that stress management database that's already out there and helping connect it to those parents. Increase self-efficacy, helping them understand that it is hard, and they can manage all of these things that are coming. That's got a really promising evidence base. Psychoeducation just on stress management proves to be helpful. Mindfulness, breathing techniques, all of those things that help lower the temperature are helpful in improved accept. If you can get over the hump of feeling crushed by the stress that's in your life, then being able to have higher levels of acceptance and better executive functioning, setting goals, pursuing goals, adapting to change, all of that comes with better stress management. And then last, reducing uncertainty. From the point of diagnosis to every other major developmental milestone, parents have to ask this question of what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Until eventually they get just asking what happens when I die. So entire lifespan oriented psychoeducation or disability education can be really helpful for parents. Knowing that, from diagnosis to school, life is going to look like this. In school, you've got IEPs, you've got supports, you've got other things going on, and you've got some other barriers that are coming. Transitioning out of school, you've got a whole different ball of wax that's coming. Helping them look ahead and plan for it so that it's not always just one shock after the next is really helpful for parents. Just kind of knowing what problems are coming and what solutions are available. And being family centered over task centered. A lot of times in the rehab world, we have, huge data entry requirements. We have agency objectives. We have federal legislation and state legislation and all of these different things pulling us in different directions. It can be really easy to fall into checking a box or meeting uh, an unwritten objective over just being family centered and addressing the needs of the person or the group of people that are sitting in front of you, just checking in and making that time to have that connection. It's what brought us into this field, and a lot of times it gets crowded out by a lot of um, procedural things. And just to make sure that we do those check-ins with families and with our clients and their supports, all of those things lead to greater acceptance. So ultimately, there's no evidence base documenting effective practices used by rehab counselors. Ironically enough, everything I just went over is used by special education teachers, primary care physicians doing the diagnosing, various research groups, but there's no evidence out there just asking rehab counselors what they do and how they do it. So that's really problematic because when it comes to that transition phase, it's the rehab counselor that's really quite front end on helping, maybe special ed coordinators, but really it's that rehab counselor that's managing that process and bringing together all of those resources. So we know that promoting acceptance is helpful. We know that key times are diagnosis, transition, and loss of independence for parents, but we don't have that research piece. And that's what really drove me to do this is there's a lot of research out there about what to do when you have a caseload of 16 or less. There's a little bit of research out there for other professions, doctors, nurses, social workers, but rehab counselors have huge caseloads. And we're rehab counselors. We have a very specific role. So I wanted to understand what is it that, people with caseloads of 150 plus can do or lower caseload numbers, but huge territories. what can we really do versus pie in the sky ideals? What are the things that we can actually do to help work with work with parents and help nudge people in the direction of greater acceptance? And this is one of the things that one of my participants mentioned. This participant said, "You know, this is a really hard one. I feel like we don't get any training on this in our profession. They talk about it in foundations, but that's the last you hear of it. Nobody gives you tips on how to help your clients. You have to wing it." And that is a reality. We have, as we went through, we've got these caseloads, we've got these needs, we've got all of these things that are kind of stacked up against us, but there isn't really a best practice out there tailored to us for rehab counselors. And and that's what I wanted to do. I know that there are rehab counselors out there doing stuff that's helping clients. I know that people are reaching greater levels of acceptance, but there's nothing really out there documenting it. So that's what I set out to do for my dissertation, was find out what are the existing practices. Let's see what we can do to make them a little bit more systematic. So, two real questions when it came to doing this research. What experiences have the rehab counselors had? What is it like when someone's got really low acceptance? What is it like when their acceptance is really good? And how do counselors understand that? How do you conceptualize it and how do you intervene with it? So, I did several interviews with rehab counselors, transition counselors, in various transition roles. Some were work incentive specialists, some were traditional transition counselor roles, some were in supervisory roles, and some were doing special grants and special programs. So I took those transcripts and encoded them and did all the stuff. But what I did was I pulled out some best practices. How do you think about it, and what are you doing to help move uh, move people from low acceptance to high acceptance? And this is what I found. There are, from a conceptualization standpoint, low acceptance is characterized in parents. Uh, and I limited my research to parents of adolescents with intellectual disabilities in transition. So this is a very narrow scope. I think there's applicability outside of it, but really the research was done just on this population, or with just this population in mind. So low acceptance, parents with low levels of acceptance were characterized by fear. They were reactive. They tended to skew uh, towards misinformation, anecdotal information over expertise and nuanced information. And their expectations were unrealistic. And unrealistic could go two ways, too low or too high. High acceptance, however, when you look at fear, the opposite of that was growth. Could embrace trial and error. Failure didn't seem devastating. Were able change was kind of an expectation. Instead of reactive, they were proactive. They were looking at ways to solve not just the problem in front of them, but prevent the next, or to lessen the impact of the next one. They were able to think ahead. This information, rather than just the anecdotes that they'd heard or read about, were able to seek out good information and trust the expert to know what they're talking. And then realistic expectations, what they thought the program, the DARS counselor, or the book rehab counselor could do for them, and what their student could do, lined up with their skills, abilities, agency objectives, realities of the economy that they live in. They were able to get things to line up better. And there were really three categories of intervention: develop a therapeutic relationship with the parents, leverage that relationship to encourage growth, and then increase access to various supports. So all of those things were used. Therapeutic relationship, a lot of the counselors I spoke with, they talked about having dual clients. Not necessarily that the parents got their own IPE or plan or things like that, but they both had goals. Their client had a goal. Their parents also had a goal for providing the support around that. And it was clear, with smart objectives, it was clear, it was measurable. They knew when they hit it. With having that dual clients, dual goals, all of those things in place, that could nudge them towards growth. They could help them understand. Yet, no right now doesn't mean no forever. It means we need to take some steps, helping those parents, using that relationship to say, wait, let's take a step back and really break down, how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? Encouraged that growth, builds flexibility into their thinking, and help take some of these large, lofty things of independent living and working independently and all of these kind of large and abstract goals, and break them down into smaller chunks. You know what? Our next step is, how do we get from point A to point B without mom and dad driving? How do we get public transportation? How do we get familiar with public transportation? Whatever it is, taking that next step and really being able to just focus on one thing instead of a big giant goal. And gaining experience. A lot of times, not only do our clients not have a whole lot of experience, but our parents don't have a whole lot of experience nudging them just outside of their comfort zone. So helping parents see their adolescent in different circumstances, different settings, seeing what it looks like when they're pushed a little bit, builds trust between the parents and the providers, and builds trust between the parents and the system that they're operating in. And then last, that increasing access, teaching self-advocacy, explaining that there are opportunities for recourse. There's opportunities to make change. There's different ways to navigate different systems. Vocational rehabilitation programs operate differently from some of the programs that manage Medicaid waiver. Some of those operate differently than some of your traditional, like your Project Surge or those types of things. Helping them understand that these are interconnected but different programs, and each one has their own timeline, their own sets of rules and regulations, and slightly different eligibility criteria, so that they can advocate for themselves appropriately. Connect them to those services, introduce them to key people, make sure they have key numbers, maybe even letting them know up front that there are some different ways to organize these things. Have to keep in touch with Voc Rehab at least every 90 days. I think with Medicaid programs, you've got to be in touch with someone every 30 days, having them have those things in place so that they can make sure that things are moving forward. And that all of these agencies also have their own timelines that they can hold their counselors and case managers accountable to. And then in just encouraging them to be involved in the community. Don't worry about mean glares or whatnot. It's okay to go out and take your kids to the football game. It's good to, if the adolescent wants to go into landscaping, it would be good to start with mowing the lawn at home. Those types of things that increase community visibility and build on that responsibility for the clients, and builds trust for the parents, just bringing real tangible experience into the day-to-day life. Right. So those acceptance levels, they can spiral upwards or down. That downward spiral, if you have someone with a fear mindset followed by reactive behaviors that tend toward misinformation and then unrealistic expectations, that can spiral. You'll have, a fear mindset. They fear the unknown. They don't know what to expect. So behaviorally, they become reactive. It's a pretty natural response to fear. Reactive behaviors make it really hard to learn good information, or to discern good information from bad information. When the amygdala is working overtime, we're more likely to believe negative information, false information, whether that's about agencies or the impact work has on benefits, or a lot of those things. So it's really hard to get good information when someone is fearful and reactive. Um, that bad information paints a bad picture of abilities and the future. So expectations get really adjusted upward or downward into not seeing the full potential of somebody, or totally overshooting what someone can do, and not being able to see um, the true strengths and abilities and capabilities that someone brings to the table. And so that unrealistic picture creates a lot of conflict between the parents and the counselor, the parents and the student and counselor, and then it repeats. There's lots of conflict. There's not much trust, and so that creates a fear mindset, which creates more reactive behavior. You know, so on and so forth. So it can spiral down until the whole relationship deteriorates. Here are a couple stories from the research that I was doing. One quote from a counselor said, one of the most difficult instances for me would be situations where the parents have no or low expectations for the young person at home. Behavior gets overlooked. There might not be chores or customary expectations or adjustments for disability factors. Uh, I've seen instances where kids get home from school, play video games into the night, and have no expectation of being involved in family activities. They never go to the grocery store. They never go out in the community. Um, and so as they pursue vocational rehabilitation, they're afraid of social situations. They don't know what to do and have those social interactions. Another counselor mentioned that a mother asked for various supports and then sabotaged all the efforts to receive them. She missed all the appointments. She no-showed all the time. There were periodic complaints that the agency wasn't doing anything through various advocacy outlets. But eventually, mom kicked the student out of the house. No one really knows for sure what she wanted, but we know for sure that that she was afraid of what was going forward. There was not trust. There was a lot of reactive behaviors and a lot of things that felt like self-sabotage all along the way because she fell into that spiral. And that's an extreme example of that spiral going down. One more was one counselor wrote about a client that they weren't super hopeful and they weren't expecting huge results. The client couldn't read, had difficulty writing. This was someone who did financial literacy, but that didn't translate into an inability to count or use math. So we were able to talk about basic financial literacy concepts, and the family didn't think those things were possible. Even afterwards, even after the client had been doing math and had calculated wages and benefits and done their own budget, even afterwards, the family was like, nope, they don't understand that. Their expectations were that there was only so much progress that could be made. So that's an example of expectations being way too low. They saw that their student could do certain things, could follow a budget, could set a budget. They could understand credit and things like that. And still, there was a lot of fear. What happens if we really give our child access over their money? Now, again, this was a big focus on intellectual disabilities, but this is a fear I think a lot of parents of kids who are born with disabilities have. But the bright side is that spiral can go upward too. So through that therapeutic relationship, encouraging growth and flexibility, and having those dual goals and small chunks and things like that, that acceptance can spiral upwards. So, if therapeutic relationship, you alleviate fear and you promote growth, flexibility in thinking, then instead of being reactive all the time, then parents are able to plan ahead and be a little bit more proactive. Through being proactive, the knowledge that they get is going to be better knowledge. They can seek out information from different sources. They can discern between an expert and an anecdotal story, and it gets better. That reliable information leads to more realistic expectations. They start to believe test results. They start to understand that there are people who know how to navigate the maze of work benefits. And then when those expectations are realistic, then students are able to get that right match. They're able to get the services that they need match their abilities, their goals match their abilities. Things tend to move smoothly. And then, of course, as things match and line up, you've built trust, and then there's less fear, and then there's more proactive behavior. And so it spirals upward just as well as it can spiral downward. The key is really to know which direction things are going. And if they're spiraling down, learn to interrupt. using those therapeutic benefits or the therapeutic relationship, encouraging growth and increasing access to services. Those are the things that they found have really disrupted that downward spiral and started to head it up. So, an example of the upward spiral, this is what a counselor reported to me was we partnered with a local company that teaches drone operation, and we made an aerospace program. We invited parents to attend as well. That created a family network. The parents are now invested with each other and with the agency. They love what they're doing, and they're using us as a resource. Engaging the parents in the process helped them accept the disability. They saw how their child functioned in a program, and the academy really was a game changer in such a positive way. So just little things like that, allowing the parents to get involved into those processes and see the things firsthand, really brought some buy-in, not just with the agency, but with each other. And it was a big change. And it kind of reversed that downward spiral into an upward spiral. So this really starts to beg the question of how do we disrupt that downward spiral that comes from low acceptance? We've got therapeutic relationship, encourage growth, increase access. And so what are people doing that interrupts that cycle of things heading downward and gets them moving back upward? So when you think about therapeutic relationship, this is, one of the most basic counseling skills that we learn in counseling, but it's also the first one we forget when overloaded with a million different tasks coming flying at us from a bunch of different directions. But it's also the one thing that spans every counseling model and every counseling theory that exists out there. Is we know it's the therapeutic relationship that can predict results more than any technique or any system that's out there. So really taking that time to be, our primary responsibility as the student with the disability, including the parents, getting to know them, identifying parents' needs and figuring out exactly what it is that they see and what are they afraid of, making sure that they feel heard just as much as the client and that their concerns are able to be expressed and heard in a non-judgmental, accepting way does enormous things for that therapeutic relationship. A lot of the counselors I spoke to talked about feeling like they had two clients. Obviously, only one made it into the system that had goals and measurable skill gains and all that stuff. But they all throughout when they were successful with parents, they saw the whole unit as the client. They were able to say, okay, my parents have these goals. These are the things I'm working with them on. Maybe even these are the supports that I'm referring them to. And my student has this other goal. And, the two, they interconnect. Um, being included and supported, peer support, finding ways to connect those parents to other supports outside of yourself is another way to just ensure that they continue to be engaged in the process and they know when to call and what to expect from you and things like that. That's kind of the first major goal. Now, once you have a really strong relationship with those parents, now you can leverage that relationship to encourage goal growth, helping them discern between the present and the future. What somebody does today may not be what they're doing 2 years from now. And that, that refers to positive behaviors and negative behaviors. That refers to abilities that they may have to abilities that they can develop over time through practice or training or whatever. A lot of times parents get stuck seeing their kids as static. When we see clients, we see a behavior to be worked on. When they see their kids behave in a certain way, they immediately envision What's that going to look like at 37? And they go into panic mode. It's cute now at 7. It's cute. It's okay at 14. But at 27, that's going to be a big problem. And that creates some of that fear. What are the consequences? What are the outcomes? And so being able to acknowledge that and direct them towards the mindset, we don't have to fix it right now. We can cultivate something that happens a little bit slower, and we can take a step back and breathe in order to make these things happen. Teaching flexibility. A lot of times plans change. Things don't work out the way that anyone expects. And that's really difficult for a parent because they've had to plan every detail of their day, of their kids, of their child's care, of all of those things. So in the transition process, when that person is learning independence, it's not going to be a smooth ride, and helping the parents to kind of be able to accept failure and take steps back and try again, embrace trial and error as a method of teaching, not just not a mandatory building success over and over and over again. And then just taking this giant project and breaking it into small chunks. One counselor gave me the story of a mother wanted her son to be able to ride public transportation, but was afraid to just send him on, either with a job coach or by himself. So she got on the bus with him and rode back and forth to the local community college a couple of times until she felt really confident that he knew what he was doing. She kind of got to know the drivers and some of the supports that were in place. The world was a lot less scary when she got to see it and experience it firsthand. And so that was just one small step towards, what ended up was going through a community college program that led to other successes. But that was just one small step. Get on the bus, ride it together. That led to a sequence of events. But just breaking it down into that, what is that next step? What can we focus on right now that will lead to the long-term result? And we'll kind of set aside the big picture right now, because that can be really overwhelming for some. And then, yeah, gaining that experience, firsthand experience. We had that example of the counselor who was bringing parents into the drone academies and letting them see firsthand, riding the bus with the child, seeing things firsthand, being engaged in those services as much as they're able or willing, really helps build that trust and that flexibility of, okay, there's some responsiveness here, there's some give and take. And then very last, increasing access, giving parents a roadmap for what all of this can look like, letting them know up front what some of the bumps along the way tend to be so that they're able to advocate for themselves, connecting them with peer supports, helping them learn and have access to resources that can give them good information. A lot of times parents rely on word of mouth, and so it just tends to be worst case scenarios get spread between angry bad experiences get spread a lot faster than expertise. So ensuring that they have access to people who can give good information, or to parents who have had both good and bad experiences, so that they can have a more balanced view of this whole process. Connecting them to services, not just saying, hey, the community service board does these things, but maybe having a contact information. Maybe even if I know caseloads are hard, but if possible, being able to participate in some of those early meetings and make sure that services are coordinated, or at least having a contact info that you are able to coordinate behind the scenes and keep things aligned as much as possible. And then that community involvement, really nudging people to not hide out in their house, in their basements, but to go to the Special Olympics game, go, bring your kids to the grocery store, get out there, do the things in life. And you can see, so they can see their student doing independent living activities and doing social interaction and responding in a dynamic way, when all they can think of is the static response that they may have seen, a few times at home. All right. So just for a quick review of the key terms that we went through in this presentation before we conclude is, disability acceptance. When I talk about disability acceptance here, I'm talking about people incorporating their disability as part of their identity, as part of their life. It's neither something they ignore completely, but it's also not all of who they are. It just becomes one aspect or one dimension of their life. So that's really when highest levels of acceptance comes out. And then parental acceptance, that is the process parents go through to introduce or accept or adapt to disability as part of their parenting role, part of their family role. Caring for someone with a disability doesn't become something where they're ignoring certain realities about their child's life, nor are they overly focused on one positive or negative aspect. They just see it as, again, they're able to see it as part of their child's identity, and thereby it's part of their identity as a parent or a family. Key points that they're going to look at this, where it's, I would say, critical acceptance moments are going to be point of diagnosis, transitioning from high school to adult services, like we focused on for the last hour. And then again, they're going to do it again as the parents lose acceptance and they start to look in or start to lose independence, not acceptance. And they start to look at, their own independent living things and they can no longer care for themselves, and they're also not in a position to do a lot of that care for their child, so they have to go through a different degree of acceptance. And it's okay to work with parents because the CRCC Code of Ethics list clients are not just people with disabilities, but people affected by disabilities, which would include family, employers, all these different things. But in the case of this particular presentation, we're really looking at that's parents. Parents are our clients. And then last is that transition period that we're looking at here. We're really kind of not making it a pre-ets or any of those types of things. We're really looking at that time of period, that time of life where clients are trying to figure out leaving high school and moving into adult services. They're going through all of those changes. And so that's what we're looking at with transition planning, finishing high school and starting adult life. So those are the ways that we can disrupt that downward spiral of low acceptance. And the whole point of all of this is not just to bring parents into higher levels of acceptance, but when parents have higher levels of acceptance, that's better outcomes for our clients. And ultimately, as rehab counselors, that's what we want. There are 7 million uh, children, adolescents with intellectual disabilities in the US. Um, Better parental acceptance for them can lead to better outcomes for all 7 million people. You throw in other congenital disabilities, and that number goes exponential. But providing those support to parents, bringing them into the process, and ensuring that they are moving towards higher levels of acceptance can have really good impacts for our clients and really good outcomes, improve the outcomes and the lives and the community participation and all of those things, forcing society to respond in a more open, adaptive way. So improving that collaboration between parents and rehab counselor and school and services, overall, much better social inclusion. Better social inclusion leads to better opportunities. Better opportunities leads to more social inclusion. So that also can become this societal upward spiral. And I think that that's something that we all want. As rehab counselors, we're dedicated to improving the lives of people with disabilities. And as our code of ethics says, the lives of people impacted by disability, caregivers, parents, friends, spouses. I think by looking at the system holistically, we can have a lot of impact. Improving home life and parental relations obviously has a huge impact on those. Parents do more caregiving than most other service providers combined are able to do. So making sure that they're doing it in a way that it feels sustainable to them and they feel supported and they are able to set and achieve and adapt goals as life comes at them really benefits all parties involved. So providing support to them is a big step in making systemic change. Thank you.